Alright guys, so big undercurrents are coming for the world in 2025. Now on this channel, we talk a lot about the US economy because it's just that important. Whenever the US prints money, whenever they raise interest rates or funds a war, it changes the global landscape. There's no escaping the shockwave of US decisions, and with Trump coming back in a matter of weeks, we have to pay extra attention. Mass deportations, tariff wars, and weaponizing the dollar, all that is coming soon. But in this video, I want to focus on China today. The second largest economy is moving to decouple from the West, and the signs were clear in 2024, and it's even more obvious today. Now, in China's New Year speech, President Xi came out and reaffirmed China's economy that the 5% GDP target for 2024 will be met. However, going forward into 2025, trying to maintain this will require extreme measures. And let's not sugarcoat it here. China's economy is facing a ton of headwinds. The property collapse did a number on people's wealth. As a result, consumption is weak. The G7 countries are also closing off their consumer markets. All these trade barriers on EVs and solar panels, they aren't a coincidence. So the only way to survive and thrive is self-reliance. It's something that China is capable of doing, especially with Russia on their side. Now, if you look at China's economic conditions, there's one big problem the central government has to solve. Now, the IMF believes China's inflation will pick up to 2% by 2026, and that's the latest prediction. However, the latest figures puts China's GDP deflator at minus 1%. In other words, China's overall growth is being dragged down by 1% because of deflation. And this is a very important situation Beijing has to confront, especially if they want to reach a 4 to 5% growth in 2025. In other words, massive stimulus needs to be launched to turn deflation into inflation. There's not much choice to turn the situation around, and in some respects, China is beginning to directly inject money into people's pockets. The government has raised salaries for government workers to boost spending. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's like the US government hiring more workers. The wage increase sounds small, only 500 yuan a month or 70 US dollars, but the average salary in China is under $1,500 a month. So this is a 4 to 5% increase in monthly income when prices on the shelves they are still dropping, and in some cases the increase is even more. Now, China in some respect is quite similar to G7 countries. The economy is heavily propped up by public spending as well, which includes salaries to workers. Now, a third of China's GDP is government expenditure, so by injecting more money here, Beijing is trying to put a floor on deflation and the real estate collapse. If you can't control the price of homes, you can always control wage growth by jacking up salaries. But let's talk a bit about how the G7 will be facing a very different China, one that is globalizing and decoupling at the same time. Now, this might sound contradictory, but it really isn't. Just like the West, China's response to the trade war is simple. We'll also protect our critical industries from Western trade. Now, Trump is very vocal about his intentions. The Chinese, on the other hand, are very subtle. You won't catch them announcing it on Twitter or film a video about it. But let's read the tea leaves in President Xi's New Year speech. It gives a snapshot of China's priority for 2025 and beyond. Grain output has surpassed 700 million tons, and China's bowls are now being filled with more Chinese grain. He didn't say imported grain or that Beijing is buying more from the world. The emphasis here is on domestic food production to feed their 1.4 billion population. The hunt for food is going inwards instead of outwards, and the biggest country to suffer would be the US. Now, this doesn't bode well for American farmers who are already facing a margin and a profit squeeze. And this is one sector that will be hurting badly. Now, Trump could also launch a deportation wave that could jack up farming costs in labor. And American farmers, they're already panicking. There are a ton of jobs being done by immigrants that local Americans shun. In 2021, the number of undocumented immigrants in the US food supply chain is simply incredible. Now, more than 1.6 million workers, and this includes farming, food production, and wholesalers. The number is probably 50% higher or maybe even double today. If these workers were to leave, US farm profits would collapse. Now, you throw in the trade war with China, you can see how dangerous the situation will get for American farmers. And if demand drops enough, while cost continues to go up, it would be utter decimation. In 2018, after the Trump tariffs, China retaliated hard. US soybeans exports fell from $12 billion to under $3 billion, and that's a demand collapse of over 70%. So the repercussions are extremely severe. The earthquake hasn't struck yet, but we can kind of see the thunderstorms starting to build. The effects would be immediate if this comes to pass. Now, to understand this shift better, we need to look at projections that use Chinese data. And when we put them together, we can see a concerted shift towards domestic production. For soybeans, China would scale their production from 23 million tons in 2022 to nearly 40 million within the next 8 years. And that's a 80% jump. Meanwhile, imports would fall from 92 million tons to 82 million. China would still be importing a lot of food, but where do you think it's going to come from? Will it be from the US or economic partners like Brazil? So, really something to think about. Food production is going local, and any import benefit will be given to the BRICS, especially during a trade war. The next tea leaf is a little more obvious. It shows us how much China will continue to ring fence their critical sectors. For the first time, China has produced more than 10 million new energy vehicles in a year. Breakthroughs have been made in integrated circuits, artificial intelligence, and quantum communications. And let's address the first sentence. China's incredible EV production that's swarming global markets, and it's causing so much panic that Japanese automakers, they are trying to combine forces to survive. Now that would be unthinkable. Honda and Nissan are considering a merger which would be quite impossible to even talk about 5 years ago. Meanwhile, BYD alone has shipped an incredible 4.2 million EVs and plug-ins in 2024 last year. That's a record. Chinese technology and pricing power are simply unbeatable at this point. Now, despite the EU imposing tariffs and the US preventing BYD from selling in the US, sales have been flying off the shelf. China is not going to share the technology easily. And here's how ruthless sales have been in 2024. BYD is nearly on par with Ford or Honda, and they don't even sell any internal combustion cars since 2022. But let's compare sales between the Chinese company and Tesla. Tesla is the world's most valuable automotive company by far. It's a $1 trillion company today, especially post Trump win. But how's the situation on the ground? BYD sales are catching up to Tesla with strong momentum. From Q1 to Q3, Tesla delivered more cars. But in Q4, BYD actually beat Tesla with 80,000 more EVs sold. And here's the crazy part. The big jump in demand was fueled by domestic Chinese buying. Local people buying cars because the government basically threw a ton of subsidies at them. So just because the trade war escalates in 2025 doesn't mean Chinese companies would collapse. If Beijing can ramp up the stimulus through handouts or salary increases, local buying will benefit from this. But to maintain their edge, sharing this technology with Western companies would be detrimental. So for self-preservation, Chinese EV companies will likely only be friend-shoring production to BRICS countries and their partners. It's going to be hard for Chinese EV companies to build a factory in the US. Even if Trump welcomes one with open arms, China could just block it on their own national security grounds. Now, the last tea leaf to discuss is about BRICS and the global majority. Now, I know a lot of you like this term better, the global majority, so I'll try to use it more whenever I can. China is actively promoting global governance, reform, and deepening solidarity and cooperation amongst the global south. He also mentions the BRI. China is also making deeper and more substantive advances in high quality Belt and Road cooperation. It's important to realize how strong BRICS is going. It used to be just 5 members: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But new partner countries have joined, which signals a big global shift. Now, chief of those are Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. Now, I like to harp on these countries because they are heavyweights in Southeast Asia. The economies there are growing and they are fertile ground for China to expand their industrial manufacturing outside of the West. Production costs there are competitive enough as well. So what does this mean? BRICS is beginning to satisfy both their production needs as well as demand, and that kind of sanction proves the global south in the event of trade war. So if Trump decides to punish BRICS over de-dollarization, the economic bloc won't just suddenly collapse here. This is a credible threat that could happen. Maybe not a 100% tariff, but punishments could come in a worst case scenario. The most pressing threat for the US is the dollarization and an increase in bilateral trade in the BRICS. And if China moves out industries to these countries, non-dollar transactions would rise. And here are some statistics from last year. This is even before we counted the 9 partner countries of BRICS. China's foreign trade with BRICS in the first 3 quarters of 2024 hit nearly $650 billion, and that's a year-on-year increase of 5.1%. And that's more opportunities for trade to be de-dollarized outside of the dollar or euro. So there will be spillover effects that are simple to understand. Demand for dollars would drop. That also isn't very good for treasury demand. If you're Washington, the most obvious way to counter this would be for the US to invest in the BRICS countries. You bring over your own industries, you increase your influence in the bloc, and you start demanding invoicing in dollars. But that card is off the table. If Trump intends to reshore production, building a factory in Brazil or Indonesia will be very hard to justify to his voter base. It's basically the direct opposite of US economic policy in 2025.
Vote for Trump and you will see a mass exodus of manufacturing from China to Pennsylvania, from Korea to North Carolina, from Germany to right here in Georgia. They're going to come to Georgia from Germany and lots of other places.
During China's speech, there was also mention of Taiwan, which is supremely important. They have reaffirmed the reunification plan with Taiwan and is a warning to Trump not to try anything funny. Now, in his speech, he mentioned quite a bit about Macau and Hong Kong, how the one country, two systems is working. And you can kind of tell that's the eventual plan for Taiwan as well. Elements of capitalism and certain freedoms, but control under the central government, especially when it comes to the economy, Hong Kong style. So Beijing's New Year speech is a pivotal address not just to China, not just to the BRICS. It's telling the world they are confident, and within the address, they peppered subtle warnings to the West. Now, we have no idea how volatile 2025 can get, but if the US escalates the trade tensions, China won't back down. They'll escalate back, and there will be a very interesting show for us to watch. But let me know what you think. Is China prepared for full-scale tariff war? And how will the US respond? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.